Hello, everyone. This is Marita, one who catches lightning, with the Path of Ish podcast, Walking with Our Shadow, where we share ancient Indigenous teachings of remembrance, all so we can walk and learn how to walk a path of radical self-love. It is with great pleasure that I welcome into the circle today Jo Henderson. Welcome, Jo. How are you?
Hi, thank you for having me here. I'm good.
I'm super excited to have this conversation with you. I've started following you on Instagram and really find that you have a very unique voice in on the side of the world that I'm not. So I'm kind of wanting to have a conversation. But before we jump into the conversation, let's start with the first question. What is your creation story?
Oh, wow, that's a great and kind of massive question. Okay, so I would guess I'm in this strange space, or what society considers a strange space, but feels quite normal for me, the world of divination, because I guess I was a bit of a strange child and I expected certain things. For example, I used to look at the calendar and I used to have this idea that I could look at a date and know what was going to happen on that date. That seemed a normal thing in my mind. And I was always really surprised when people had accidents. So I used to think, well, why wouldn't they know in advance? Surely you would feel that in advance. So I seem to have some kind of inbuilt setting, which was that you can engage with events before they happen. You can read nature. You can understand things. And I found that other people's minds didn't work like that. And then I picked up my first tarot deck when I was in my early 20s in quite a loss of faith moment. And I picked it up for the artwork and it reeled me in. And it's ever since it's been like a mansion with an infinite number of rooms, in the sense that every time I think I know a fair amount, I open a door, there's something else, there's more and more, and it's led me to in all kinds of direction, and eventually just to challenge everything I know about everything, all the narratives that were handed to me and that seemed invisible and normal. And yeah, and I'm just keep going in that direction, trying to make sense of everything.
So you said some very powerful things here and very interesting things of how you were. I don't even know how to say how you didn't even realize how people couldn't read nature and kind of see the symbols and be observant. And since we're talking today about symbols and how they change and how to read them and the tarot and all of this, let's talk a little bit about this idea of prediction technology. A lot of people, you just said, I see the tarot and it's always teaching me. It's always opening up more and more. It always shows me what I don't know and things like that. Yet so many people come to tarot or look for symbols to predict and have something very like concrete. Um,
Hmm.
let's kind of just jump into the nuances or the demands
Hmm.
of prediction technology.
Okay, so I would say with tarot, there's two kind of main roads to go down. There's the world of fortune telling, which is more the French tradition of just laying like nine cards on the table and say, you're going to have a problem with somebody like this. The outcome is going to be this, that, and the other. And and then they just make a pronouncement in quite a short way. And then there's more the psychological approach. But in every case, we're confronted with the idea of our model of the world, which is either that we're predestined and we can, in some way, read that script that's been written in advance by whoever we, and through symbolic language, Or we use symbolic language more, I guess, in a psychological Jungian sense of exploring who we are and what our possibilities are. And often people who come for readings, they don't really know what their worldview is, because they haven't asked themselves that question.
Mm-hmm.
And it might be a confusing mix of things. Maybe some things their grandmother told them about things that seemed fated, but also the materialist worldview narrative, which is that we just make our own fate, unless we're in an oppressed class, and then certain things are going to happen to us, and we need to confront the whole power system in order to overcome that. So the, there are these sort of dominant narratives, and I think people are a little bit lost in all of that.
So, as we talk about kind of the inability to even know sometimes, when
Mm,
people, as they're lost in their narratives, let's talk about a little bit historically about tarot and the symbols and how they've changed and how that narrative has changed. Because you said a lot of people bring in, they might not know, but they have these stories, right? And
mm.
so they influence, their perception of this reading. And so I'd like to kind of jump in, like historically, how that's, let's symbols do change, yes, and they are influenced
Mm-hmm.
by culture, and yet we're in a time where everyone's like, no, this is the reality. This means this. Three simple bullet points, and the loss of history is
Yeah,
mind-boggling to me. So let's just jump into the
yeah.
development and
So I think that there's a deep anchored esoteric language at the root of tarot. So I do see it like I have the mansion metaphor, and I'll try not to mix too many metaphors, but there's this idea of digging down. And you first of all go to your guidebook and you get, yeah, your bullet points and your little narrative that you get, very much like in pop astrology. And perhaps you don't necessarily think about what is a queen, what is a king, what is an emperor, what is a hierophant, what does it actually mean? And when you start going deeper, the codes get broken up into things that are a bit more abstract, like the emperor card, which represents power. Well, we don't have emperors at the moment. I mean, there is a king in England. He's not an emperor. It's an archetype that's unfamiliar to a lot of people, particularly those born in republics. So it, it just sort of gets transferred onto this idea of earthly power or whatever. But what is this archetype, and why is it the number four important? And when you start digging into the numerology or elemental associations, you start looking at what could be the building blocks of reality, and the idea that some like nine numbers or four elements can somehow describe so much. And it's by engaging with, I think, element and number. For example, when we think about the number four, it's also the idea of the geometrical shape, the square, and this square being this kind of block of reality. And it's a foundation. You can build on a square. And then when you add one, two, three, four, you get 10, and then 10. So you've got all of the numbers represented in that. You've got totality. You've got the idea if you've got 4 points in space, you can have a triangle based pyramid. That's the first three-dimensional shape. So you've got the three dimensions. It just gets more and more abstract in three dimension when you dig down. And when you dig down, those archetypes might not be immediately useful to somebody if they come to you and say, I want to understand where I'm going with my career, whatever. But I think as a tarot reader, you do need to go down to that level and then come back up and translate some of that into something. relatable and usable for modern querent, but not something that is, how can I say this? Not something that just jettisons everything historical or abstract or challenging.
How has your observation at an early age of nature and symbols allowed you to develop deep relationship with tarot?
I think the first symbols I engaged with were letters. And apparently, when I was in my crib, I used to make the infinity sign with my finger over and over again. And then later on, when I was about 3 or 4, I tried to teach myself to write. And I came home on my first day of school crying because I couldn't write yet. So I was really, really obsessed with the idea of letters. But I would say, in terms of nature, it was more a feeling tone. So I was lucky enough throughout my childhood and my teens, and I have one of these about once every 5 years now, to have what Colin Wilson called peak moments. I didn't have a name for them, I called them perfect moments. So moments of complete bliss, where I'm always in contact with nature. So maybe just looking at my window at the trees and the sky, and then being filled with a sense of presence and perfection and unity. And these moments would last for, I don't know, maybe 2 minutes, and they would seem to transform months of my life. And I tried to talk to other people about that. Do you get that feeling? And I did meet one, I did have one friend at university who said, yeah, I've had that. But I couldn't find anyone else. And then it was only in the last few years that I read a Colin Wilson book, and he'd put together all these people describing that in literature. And I think that, yeah, like mystics and writers often have those moments. And so it was, but there was no language for that. There was no coding for that. It was more emotional, but I could sense there was something behind nature. It wasn't just dead matter. But I felt a little bit. I guess so. Yeah, I've been looking for the bridge to that, because in the Christian tradition, there is a mystical Christian tradition which I think probably has some kind of answers to questions, but it wasn't mine. It
Mhm.
wasn't what I had access to, and I felt kind of really blocked off by the spirituality that was offered to me. And so later on, I also read the runes, which is something, to be honest, I haven't done it for a little while. But that really gave me a very strong a feeling of nature, because of the fact that it was always carved on wood and it seemed to come out of the forest. It's a divination technology that seems to come from the trees
Mm.
and is very, very native to Northern Europe. And I think I was in search of a kind of indigenous culture native to the Northern Europeans. And right, the northern edges, we've still got a little bit of it. So Scotland, Ireland have got still quite strong cultures, and you've got certainly northern Scandinavia, but it's very diluted, I would say, compared to what indigenous cultures in the south have managed to hold on to. I've covered a lot of ground there.
No, it's
Hopefully
beautiful.
that's good.
I think one of the important things to note here, and you and I chatted about it once, is how when you talk about nature, you feel it in your body. You said that people from Scotland and Ireland are very different when they talk about nature. It's a more indigenous connection to nature. as
Mm,
body, as land, versus, there's a nature out, you know, oh, look at that lovely tree. Maybe I'll interact
mm-hmm,
with it. So I kind of want to pause and kind of get into that, because technology has to be held by a body, it has to
mm.
sense in a land, in a body. So, and talk about that part of the bridge for you.
Yeah, so uh, yeah, the idea of a place like Scotland is that nature is very powerful. You can have your cities and your rail links and your airports and your supermarkets and everything, but you still always get the impression that nature's the boss and that so you know your place. And then there's the idea that Scotland is a land, not a nation. Now, of course, plenty of Scots are nationalistic and, will wave the tartan and the flag and so on. But I still think there's a sense of the land, of belonging to the land, rather than to this political entity which is part of the United Kingdom. And that's sort of experiential, definitely. And I am going to tie this to the tarot because I have thought about this because every tarot reader finds themselves misusing the cards a little bit. And by that I mean taking them out to read on a situation that actually should be asking your body about because your
Mhm,
body knows. You know, like,
mhm,
what should I think about this person? And actually, your body's going, well, I know. I
mhm.
know. I've been trying to tell you to keep away from him or whatever. But you get into that mental second guessing thing and you get addicted to the divination technology, and it's finding that balance where you you don't become dependent on your divination technology and use it to actually override your intuition, which is what it's supposed to be feeding. So it's a bit like the idea of engaging with Scotland as a political nation, as a unit, and also a land, and keeping your feeling and not getting sucked into the story of Scotland, if that makes sense. So you don't get sucked into the story of tarot and start ignoring your own physical sensations and what you intuitively already know about a situation or a person.
No, that's beautiful. And, you know, I'm curious. I'm a curious creature. How do you see, or that that misuse, I guess, as you said, of not listening to the body? Are you seeing our trajectory as a human nation, or human creatures, or whatever you want to call us today? Do you see a fork in the road? Do you see kind of people wanting to return, and an ability to connect again to that way, that more kind of indigenous way? And is the other fork of the road another form of technology that's going to take us further away? Where do you feel that we're at right now?
Oh, that's a great question. I've been thinking about that for the last 3 years, really intensively, particularly since COVID. And one of the reasons for that is that I I teach, um, and my classes went from being, face to face to being online. And interestingly enough, in French, the names are distanciel et présentiel. So you've got the word presence in the idea of a face to face thing. And I really started thinking about presence and the word presence and what difference it makes to be physically present with people and to be present in the same way that you and I are, talking over the internet. And in many ways, I think in some ways, there's a real presence that somehow is created over time and space because maybe we can actually connect at a higher level. But we are, yeah, definitely getting an idea where the body seems less and less important. And I agree with you. Think I think there is already a fork in the road, and I know which way I want to go. I want to get back to the land and the body. And I think a lot of people do, even if they haven't put it into words. And I actually wrote a book during the lockdown because I had seen the Neuralink, Elon Musk's Neuralink. I don't know if it's still the name he's using, and the idea of an implant in the brain. And I was like, oh, whoa, oh, whoa. And so I wanted to imagine a world in the future where people were linked up, and then you would have a group of people that wouldn't be. And so you'd have this utter divide, this digital divide. And I do think that our way forward is listening to Indigenous wisdom. I think we've come to the end of a road in some way, in terms of we've tested the limits of a certain model of civilization. And there were a group of people who were excluded. And what I see happening now is false inclusion. So, what I mean by that is like politicians putting their hands on their hearts and saying something sincere in inverted commas about Indigenous people and marginalized communities, but they wouldn't listen to anybody. They wouldn't invite any spiritual leaders from Indigenous communities to come and advise them. They, they, they don't want to include their worldview. They just want to. Maybe I'm being cynical, but I genuinely feel that this is optics. And it's precisely that that the Indigenous worldview seems different, is in that it's not optics, it's being. I mean, you have this culture. I'm very, far from it. So, I feel like, what do you think?
Yeah, no, I love all of this conversation, and where kind of imagery brought me to as you were chatting is, we were talking about archetypes and the archetype of patriarchy, how that
Mm-hmm.
kind of changed things. And again, a lot of people get very inflamed with this word, but I want to look at patriarchy as a technology because
Mm.
I'm currently sitting, one of my teachers is from an Apache lineage, and we have a lot of conversations about how, even though the warriors were warriors, they weren't the ones making the decisions. They went to a council of women, and it was the women that made the decisions. And so we talk a lot about, and we're talking about like big name figures in the Americas, like,
Mm-hmm.
Geronimo, like
Mm.
big chiefs. And we have these very interesting conversations about how it was. And part of this is probably why it's standing out, is this lineage, this Moonwalker lineage that I'm a part of, is it was never passed down through blood because they saw in, you could say, the runes. They saw that the colonizers were
Mm.
coming. They had this vision,
Mm.
and so they got together with other people and other nations and started to try to conserve as much knowledge as possible. And there's this story of La Doña. La Doña was from Spain. Beautiful,
Mm-hmm.
amazing green eyes, jet black hair, was had been captured or traded and became a very integral part of the society, and had an opportunity to go back to Spain. And then she came back, and they're like, "Why are you back?" She goes, "Well, in Spain, I'm no one. I have no property. I have no name. I have nothing. But with you in your society, I have land. I can divorce.
Mm-hmm.
I have a voice. I have value." And so I kind of want to talk about it that way, as kind of the programming, right? Technology, part of
Mm.
technology is a programming that creates uh, reality, not just physical objects. And so when you're talking about world nations and the end of a program to a certain degree, for me, what comes to mind, and the huge thing between Western and Indigenous, is value. In indigenous
Mm,
places, you are valued because you're a creature of Mother Earth. Where in
yeah.
Western, you have to earn it. And you can never really earn it because you're damned, from the beginning. What an
Mm-hmm.
interesting program. I always sit with that. I'm like, wow, that's a really interesting program that someone put into the system. You can never be enough. So
Yeah.
part of that, I believe, is this technology of when the matriarchal systems got taken over by the patriarchy. So if you're as curious as I am to talk about that, do you have anything to say about that?
Yeah. Well, actually, I've got a little. I don't know if I could say indigenous, but my my sons are of Cameroonian heritage,
Mm,
and their dad is from Cameroon, and so I spent time there. And one of the things that I noticed, for example, so it's not necessarily matriarchal. It's interesting, but for example, when a child is born, so often men they'll have children with several wives, women, and then the main wife, like their husband's child will come, and she accepts it. But it's not a submission thing. It's like it's a child.
mm-hmm,
It's seen like that, as in it doesn't matter who you are, you're a child.
mm-hmm,
You don't have a value judgment. Oh, that's the bastard child of my husband. No, that's a child of the blood of my husband. He's part of the family. That's it. And and so it's really interesting idea about the value of life being much more important than what our sort of moral considerations and the way that we would judge. So that was something that struck me. And and then also our idea of mm, that there is quite separate roles, but you wouldn't look at a Cameroonian woman and think that she was oppressed because she's extremely powerful in her role. And I don't. I feel like the power structures are mm, inhuman. They are masculine, but I feel like they're also inhuman, as in that they dehumanize the men as well. It's not necessarily a yes, I mean, it has been a masculine domination, but I feel like the masculine has been dominated by something. Mm, oh, oh, I was going to sound a bit like David Icke there and say reptilian, but I kind of meant it from the point of not being heart based,
mm-hmm,
of being totally mind based and left brained. And I'm kind of concerned a little bit about um, the idea that now modern feminism is a little bit like the idea that you're worth something because you have a high paid job and you don't give a shit. That sort of just mimicking a masculine archetype, which has actually done quite a lot of damage to the masculine, if that makes sense.
mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Um, and yeah, but I think that's also perhaps why there's. I mean, this is a whole field as well, but why there's so much questioning of gender now? Because I think that the masculine archetype, or the way that it's been rolled out, has also reached a kind of end of line, and so it's starting to fall to pieces. And also, the masculine archetype was very much about a chain of command with God at the top, or the divine of some kind. But when you remove the divine, you just have left brain masculinity,
Hmm.
which shuts out so much
Mm-hmm.
and leads to huge imbalance. And it's a kind of sickness, that kind of imbalance. That's my view anyway. Um, Not that I feel represented by a lot of modern day feminism, but you know,
So, as we kind of have seen, and we've been talking about these programs kind of coming to an end, the
Mm,
exploration of archetypes coming to the end, and discovering that part of it is because it seems there was a break, you know, as you were saying,
mm,
there is no connection to divine. And so then that program took off on its own and created chaos, you could say, which is, everything creates
mhm.
chaos. And so how can the technology of symbols, right? How can we go back to them? Can we go back to tree language, as you said, the runes, and connect to them if you are part of, that wave that went astray, and landed on the land, and took a few things out?
Mm.
How can those who aren't even aware, as you said, of their worldview, how can they look to the technology of symbols as a way to kind of return to their bodies and to that knowing and to that inherent value?
All right, so that's a great question, and hopefully my answer is not going to be too confusing. But something. So I also teach semiology, which is the language of signs, like at university level. And one of the things that comes up is actually that in our modern materialist culture, we've got an idea of absolute language, and what that means is that our culture is language. So the current materialist worldview is that basically language is just this weird thing that we involved, utterances that became formalized into systems that were all random and meaningless, essentially. The only meaning they have is that which is projected onto it by us. Everything's contained in language. Everything's a figment of language. That's the current worldview. But the ancient worldview is that language is an attempt to connect with the divine. Language is an attempt to represent reality, and language will never be enough. And one of the reasons, because language is this idea of like consecutive sounds, phonemes, syllables, that we follow when we're listening to somebody, or a consecutive, just a row of letters that make sounds in our head. A symbol is a way of having direct apprehension. It's more like intuition. You can look at it and it's more than the sum of its parts, a bit like the human body is. Like, so we can name everything in the human body, but we still haven't explained what life is. So you can look at a symbol and you can say, well, the circle represents an entity, and then the cross beneath it represents the descent into matter, into the horizontal plane. So you can take it apart like that, but in a way you haven't captured it. You always have the sense that it's beyond your ken, beyond your ability to express it. And symbols are like a technology. They're like a mirror, to look, as the Bible says, to see in a glass darkly, to kind of try and refract and understand a bit of the essence of everything. That's how I see symbols. But I think until we flip back into the idea that language is not everything, language is an attempt rather than everything fits in that. Does that make sense?
No, I love it. And as you're saying this, what comes to to mind is, a lot of what we're talking about is, even though we're talking about a prediction technology, even within that, there is this
Mm-hmm.
this symbol, this language of the unknown,
Mm-hmm.
the unfixed, and how, again, something that goes against the unfixed, right, is this need or immediacy and this concreteness. And we see that in, as we've talked kind of around it, a lot of programs that don't want people to go to tarot, right? Those who damn it, those who see language that was put in ability. And so, again, we're talking about this break, right? A
Mm.
program gone awry, where we try to fix
Mm-hmm.
and fixate
Yeah.
the divine and take away humans'
Mm-hmm.
curiosity which I believe is central to divinity.
I think, I mean, I could be wrong, but this is what I feel now. I feel like we do need a pagan revival, like paganism, because
Yes.
that authority thing of the top down of, well, I can't have my own ideas about things. There's an authority above me who's going to tell me what I need to do and think, and I will just hand myself over to that. And then there's somebody above them, and there's somebody above them, and there's a little bridge person like the Hierophant or the Pope that has a direct connection with divine, maybe, and but paganism is, I walk in the forest and I'm part of that, and I can read it, and I can do magic, and I can talk spirits, and it's you're part of it. You don't need to go to somebody outside. There obviously there are connections, and there are people with greater understanding, wise people that you're going to listen to, but you have your own personal relationship with the divine. It's not something that you have access through an expert class, and who often like cut you off from that. And it's not the point now where you're ridiculed for having a belief in the transcendent by the majority of well-educated people. I think it's I don't know. It's feel like people have been lobotomized and they're happy in a sense. They've lost something so valuable.
Yeah. One of the things that I don't think many people talk about, and they
Mm.
romanticize, like the return to nature, the return of getting out of these programs that we're in. But there's people, I do circles
Mm.
that just talk about free will and choice. And it's really interesting because people don't even know what it means or who defined it. And then by the end of the
Mm.
circle, they're outraged. you know? All of a sudden, they've been living this idea of what free will and choice was, and yet they haven't actually, quote unquote, free nation. They've never
Mm.
actually been free. And so what I see is, as many people romanticize Indigenous ways, is like as people come into my circles, and you're asked to be responsible for yourself, you're asked to think for yourself, you're asked to question, you're asked to not have anything fixed, including myself, that there's a big, like, the
Mm.
there's a tower moment,
Yeah.
as we can relate it. And the tower moment can be painful. There might be this desire to get out of the matrix, but we're in a tower moment. So how can people in their tower moment, right? How can the tower teach us of this switching from, the fork in the road? Can I go back and then go back to nature? And
Yeah, I
how
mean the
painful that can
tower's
be.
a great image because it's like an old institution in a way, and it's like stale energy as well, so when we think of something like the Russian Revolution, you can imagine there was a phase of great optimism and how we're all going to be equal and this is going to be amazing and we've got rid of this sort of oppressive class, and then it became its own oppression. And so then that needed to go as well. And that's the tower. It's when things sort of coalesce and then they go rigid, and the system stops serving the people and the people start serving the system. And then the system demands more and more and more of them. And then eventually they have to throw that over. And so it's yeah, it's kind of like a hard shell that needs to be broken free from every so often. And it rears the person who doesn't need to have tower moments because they've kept themselves fluid and supple all the way through life. And so it's always a liberation, and I show people if they do get the tower card, the sort of the energetic release. Um, I know personally in when I came out of a long relationship that was difficult, it was like a massive release. and all my creative energy just started pouring forth. And so I think for people, they'll have that time of feeling bereft, but it's really energizing ultimately. It becomes a catalyst for so much change. But yeah, it's true. You you do pass through to the other side of the looking glass. I think when you start seeing the place you grew up in a completely different way, it is lonely in the beginning. But I think like what's great about what you're doing is that you're also offering a community so that people aren't just having this moment like on their own in their rooms, watching YouTube videos. There's somewhere to go. There are other people who feel the same, who've seen the same things, who felt the same things.
Hmm. So, as we're talking about this journey and this historical journey with symbols, your personal journey with symbols, talked a little bit about the past, the future, the in between. I just want to dip a little bit into this what we're facing right now, and
Mm.
which is AI, right? And a lot of people don't even know what AI is. That a lot of it is being used and thrown around, and it really isn't AI, because it's not thinking for
Mm-hmm.
itself. It's just copying and pasting. That's not AI. How people are just going to that, as now
Mm.
truth, like this fixed truth. And so what happens to our symbols? What happens to how we write, how we paint, how we,
Oh, yeah. Oh
who
my
is
God.
taking over our
I
symbols?
mean, I honestly, I don't know what this is going to be. I switched between two viewpoints. One was sort of coming a little bit full circle, the idea of even, in an online call, presence is maintained, and even in AI, meaning is maintained because meaning is fundamental to the fabric of the universe. And then I also think, oh, this is a massive corruption, and what will have to happen is that there will be just a breakaway civilization, for want of a better word, that there will be people within, I know it's a hackneyed old cliche, but people within the matrix and people outside it living in a different way. Yeah. And I don't quite know where that's going to go. I've got to be honest. Oh, yeah, what's your feeling on that?
Oh, um, I think my feeling
Mm-hmm.
resides in giving people the choice, you know, to provide people a space where they can choose, instead of
Mm.
just going along, a place of creating a space of sovereignty and asking and questioning and staying curious. So that is my mantra, I guess you could say,
Mm.
because it could go any way, but hopefully people choose it and not just go along.
Yeah, and it makes me just think
Beautiful.
of also when, like in Egyptian mythology, Thoth was said to have invented writing, and the other gods were questioning it and saying, well, sounds great, your invention, but will it not cause the loss of human memory? And so there was an idea that a technology, is always birthed with something else, and it can sometimes stand in the place of something else, which is actually the meaning of the word sign, something which stands in place of something else. And so we can often mistake the sign for the reality. We can get too involved with the writing and not see the reality behind. And I think the thing with AI is, okay, so if we entrust our memory to something written, so we take note, so we don't need to keep it in our memory banks. What will happen when our judgment is outsourced? Will we lose the capacity to judge? And I think, possibly not, but it's just the idea that we need to have these conversations at least, so that people can think about when to use them and when not to use them. But unfortunately, we've got a maximizing capitalist culture that's just the more you use something, the more somebody somewhere is making a profit. And so everyone is just, pushed to use something a maximum. And then we just mop up the consequences later on down the line.
Yeah, this reusing of symbols or technology till they become completely, they lose,
Mm,
if you think, their power, or at least to the everyday, their
mm,
importance. I have a lot of people come and ask me, Marita, you talk about living a life of prayer, living a life of ceremony. What does that look like? I said it could be as simple as, when you have your cup of tea in the morning, connecting, to the water, saying thank you, building relationship, connecting to the tea and the people, and hopefully it was harvested in a good way, and thanking them and thanking the plant kingdom, because is the plant kingdom. It is plant medicine. And I remember having a conversation. I work with a lot of people in the UK, and I said, they gave you your greatest symbol, greatest ceremony, and they hid it in the everyday. But when do you go for your cup of tea? When do you go? When do you sit with this ritual that has become so much a ritual that you don't even see the symbols or the connection anyway? And that's how a lot of Indigenous practices were hidden in plain sight, that they
mm,
became just everyday things that people don't
mm-hmm.
realize the power. So, what are ways in your, you know, um, mind or heart that people can start reconnecting to overused symbols or overused technology, overused ceremony?
Well, I think also the idea of less is more, in that when so I mean, I make videos on Instagram, but I didn't for so long, and I struggle with it in the sense that I don't think people didn't go to the Oracle at Delphi every like 24 times a day. I think some people will watch 18 tarot videos in a day or in a week or whatever, and it becomes meaningless at that point. I think if you want to do some form of divination, you ask one question, you do it once about that one thing, and then you allow time around it, and you focus on it, and you thank the guide for their guidance. You thank the universe for giving you that sign. And then you have to be patient and sit with that little seed that you were given. Because yeah, definitely less is more with divination. You can overdo it. And then also coming back to the body, asking yourself, do I need to look at a card? Do I need to watch a reader? Do I need to look at my stars or whatever? What am I feeling? And get reacquainted with the body and its sensations, because everybody knows, that thing, no matter how cut off they are, that thing where maybe they got into a relationship with somebody and they knew they shouldn't have done really. And then when it sort of ends miserably a year or two later, whatever, they go, I actually knew on the first date this wasn't going to be right for me. But they talked over their own body signals. Um, and the body signals should actually be enough for the majority of people. It's about quieting a space so that you can listen to it and also trust it, and not just go, oh no, but that seems unreasonable and that seems unfair. And, like, giving people the benefit of the doubt doesn't mean necessarily eradicating your own intuition, your own body awareness.
Yeah, that's so powerful. And connecting to the body
Mm.
and not trying to override it
Hmm.
or override someone else's, right? Like, you're saying, those red flags are like, oh no,
Yeah,
I'll make them green,
yeah.
It will work hard to override this in this other person. And then you don't give
Mhm.
them the free will and choice to be in their lesson, to be in their reality, which is the creation of their lesson. Oh my God. I've enjoyed this conversation so much. I hope you come back. But what last words do you want to share with us? And please make sure that you share about your book that people can check out and your Instagram and how to connect with you. But what wisdom do you have for us at this time?
I would say cultivate self-trust and notice what you notice. Maybe look back at things that you've experienced and go, I noticed that. And maybe the way you noticed it, because people get things in different ways. Some people will get more of a sensation in the body, and some people might get a very distinct thought or whatever. And just to notice the way that you notice and respect and cultivate that, because it's really, really precious. And we have the spider senses that our animals do. They've just become blunted, but like domestic animals that don't know how to hunt. We've kind of blunted those, but they're there. And so, yeah, that's what I would give as advice. And my book is not published. It's not quite ready. But if people want to follow me on Instagram, that'd be great. I'm at Tarodecos at Instagram. That's Tarot, TAROTDECOSSE on Instagram. And that's about it, actually. I don't. I, I haven't. My website's not actually live yet. So that's on my to-do list.
Well, at least they have a starting point, and
Mhm.
that is all we need, right? To be able to make connection. Thank you so much for what
Thank
you're
you.
doing out in the world. I truly enjoy your videos, and your readings are powerful. So, if you haven't gotten a reading from Jo, please find a way to do so. It will shift your paradigm and allow you to reconnect to your sense and your senses and your body, and allow you to embrace symbols in a very different way. Thank you, Jo. Thanks so much for being with us, and
Oh, thank you.
hope to have you on again soon.
Brilliant. Thanks so much.
Once again, it is with deepest gratitude that I bow to you for joining me on this podcast, this episode, this circle, this plática, this meditation, this remembering. I hope that you have stayed curious. I hope to see you in the circle again next week. So make sure that you like or follow. Until then, may you be blessed with abundance of peace and radical self-love.